In this video, we're going to be talking about needs assessments. My name is Dr. Jess Camp. My pronouns are she and her, and I have about 20 years of social work experience, primarily working in the Metro Detroit and Wayne County area. I didn't come to social work loving all things research and evaluation, but I absolutely do now. My journey actually started as a social work student at the University of Michigan, with a focus in interpersonal practice and mental health. I worked as a mental health and substance use recovery therapist for adults in Detroit, and after about 5 years was promoted into a coordinator position for a small program called Supported Education. Supported Education is designed to connect community mental health consumers to higher education by offering introductory college courses and support services. While running this program, I increasingly became responsible for tracking metrics, making decisions about what to do with our finances, and expanding services in thoughtful ways. And I realized quickly that not only did I need to brush up on my macro social work skills, I also needed to understand more about research and evaluation. So I actually returned to school as a PhD student at Wayne State University. This is where I fell in love with policy analysis. Once I graduated, I decided that I enjoyed this work so much that I taught for several years at the University of Michigan Flint and later at the University of Michigan Dearborn campuses. And today, I've hung out my own shingle, a business called Social Work Data, where I'm able to work full-time as a social work evaluator and provide other social work support services in Wayne County. I also teach program evaluation part-time as an intermittent lecturer at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. To share more about my experience in developing and using needs assessment, I've broken this video down into 3 parts. First, some learning objectives. Second, an overview of needs assessments. And third, giving you an example of a project that I actually started in 2015, but has ended up having a ripple effect and continues to influence my work today. By the end of this video, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to define what a needs assessment is, understand what it does and how it can be used, identify different types of needs assessments and what influences the type that we might choose to use, and use my personal example to help tie all of these pieces together into practice action. Let's dive in and start with our overview. A needs assessment is an incredibly useful tool, and it is among one of the most commonly requested services that I'm asked for as an evaluator. I think that this might be because of what needs assessments can do. They're very broad and they can help us do everything from defining a social problem or injustice to understanding who's being impacted by it. It can give us an understanding of where we currently are and where we need to be, and it can give us the information necessary to build an effective service, program, or intervention. Less well known, needs assessments can also let us know what services or programs already exist in our area. It can also let us know if there are other areas or regions that are dealing with similar problems and what types of programs and services they have adapted, so that we might be able to borrow from their best practices and see what works best for us. It can let us understand the barriers that our organizations and our programs face, especially the ones that might be impacting our service provision. Just to note, a needs assessment isn't the same thing as doing an assessment of an individual's or family's needs. Those tend to be clinical and tend to be client-facing. A needs assessment tends to look at larger groups, populations, programs, service provision, regions, all the way from smaller local needs to even broader national ones. Before you start planning your needs assessment, there's actually 3 things you want to think about first. First is the type of need or needs you're looking at. Second is the focus of your needs assessment. And third is the amount of engagement you should have in your needs assessment. When we use the word need, most people tend to think of absolute need, those resources considered necessary for basic well-being or survival, like food, clean water, shelter, or clothing. But as researchers and social workers, we've identified many other needs that we often address with a needs assessment. There's felt need, or as this is sometimes called, subjective need. These are the needs that people say they feel like they have. If you look at an area that might have an undeveloped piece of green land, some people might feel that a playground is most needed. Other people might feel that a walking trail is most needed. Usually with this type of need, there's not data or research that's necessarily behind defining what might be needed. It just might be what people feel is needed. There's normative need, or a need that's defined by what is considered normal by experts or by current societal standards. This can assess for needs that someone might have for basic social participation, like enough money to be able to see a movie occasionally or to visit a friend. This type of need should be assessed critically, though, because sometimes this can be a need framed outside of the population that experiences the need. There's expressed need. Expressed need and felt need are similar, but expressed need might be different because it might be what is demanded. This might stem from grassroots organizing, like the Water Rights March in Detroit, or similar demands expressed during the marches around the Flint water crisis. Comparative or relative need explores the needs caused by inequality or an injustice and tends to be based in current circumstances. Examining wage inequality by race and gender, looking at the average lifespan across all major cities in the United States, or determining what regions of Detroit have the largest gap between needed mental health services and available mental health services are all examples of assessing this particular type of need. Future need is using trends that we know are happening to predict need and do what we can now to prevent that adverse impact of the unmet need before it actually happens. As climate change gets worse, building better water and power management systems to try to avoid potential weather and climate-related disasters. Or when economists predicted that there was about to be a huge jump in inflation recently, so President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. These are both examples of assessing for future need and implementing action now before they happen. Lastly is crisis or critical incident need. This is unfortunately when something has already happened, already gone wrong, an emergency or a failure of the system has occurred, and we're problem solving from behind. An example of this might be making sure that all youth in Detroit have equitable access to internet and computers. But unfortunately, this didn't happen until the public schools were forced to go online during the pandemic. Then it became a crisis or a critical incident need. Once you know the need or needs you're looking at in your assessment, you need to move on to the second thing you need to think about, and that's what the focus is. Remember that it's not enough as a social worker to just be against the injustice or adverse impact of unmet need. We have to do something about it. We need to create a new service or program. We can raise awareness of existing services and programs. We can improve the availability of services. We might make sure that those who need services can actually access them. Or we need to make sure that the services that are being provided are considered acceptable and adequate. An example of this might be if our organization works in a racially diverse area but doesn't provide culturally competent or culturally humble services. There might be resistance to using services since people might find that their needs aren't being met. Now that you've made a determination on what the need or the needs of your assessment are, and you have a focus, the third thing you want to think about is your level of engagement. Sometimes I'm asked to do a very simple basic assessment of regional needs. An organization might want to determine if by providing transportation they're going to be able to cover that as a cost in their program. So they might give me zip codes of their current participants and I might map those out to make a determination on how long it's actually taking clients to get to the clinic. This type of needs assessment is driven by me as the evaluator, and it's called an independent needs assessment because I can do it independently pretty much of any other input. I, as the evaluator, drive what's being done for the data collection, I interpret the results, and I give the organization a report of my findings. This tends to be a pretty low effort assessment, but I'm likely also to have pretty low impact on a change or an action. A collaboration needs assessment is when the evaluator works with the organization and/or vested stakeholders throughout the entire assessment process. This is a more involved type of assessment where the needs, data collection, analysis, interpretation of the data, and even the action decided from that data is done collaboratively. This does take more effort and more engagement, but it also has more impact, since often the organizations use this data to create a very real policy or program change. This can resonate across several programs and can even indicate a shift in the organizational culture, values, and focus. Tends to be a little bit more expensive in resources, but does provide a meaningful impact. Lastly is the most engaged type of needs assessment, and this is an empowerment needs assessment. This is my very favorite type of needs assessment. An empowerment needs assessment is driven entirely by the stakeholders. The evaluator in this case works as a teacher or an organizer and actually provides the steps and education necessary for the organization to run their own evaluation. They're the ones who define the needs. They frame how the data will be collected and what data will be collected. They analyze that data and use the results to problem solve or plan for action or implementation. Given the time and effort necessary for this particular type of evaluation, I've only had the opportunity to do this type of assessment with students. But with additional funding and resources being dedicated to evaluation, I'm looking forward to a time where this is a more common type of community evaluation. You're now ready to start a needs assessment. Let's talk about a few of the steps that are required here and what that looks like. I follow 8 steps when I'm conducting a needs assessment. First, I make sure that I have enough investment and I understand the reason for doing the assessment. Next, I lay the groundwork for a needs assessment. This can include understanding the historical background of the need, problem, or the population being impacted. I might look at how a need has historically been defined, how it's being defined now, and talk to people to see if maybe it should be defined in a different way. I connect with stakeholders and vested partners, making sure that I'm building relationship and giving them a clear understanding of what I can and cannot do as a part of the assessment process. And I make sure that I understand the political implications and the political environment that my assessment is occurring in. Step 3, plan the needs assessment. So to plan the needs assessment, you need to start with a clear definition of the problem. Who or what is being impacted by the unmet need and how they are being impacted. You need to choose a methodology. You might choose a quantitative needs assessment using a secondary data set, an existing survey, or creating a new survey. Or you might do a qualitative needs assessment, conducting focus groups, interviews, looking at existing tweets, pictures, or videos, or you might combine these 2 data collection types. Once you've chosen a method and you have a data collection plan that is connected to your theory, the problem or the need you're assessing, and the outcome you're looking at, or your focus for the needs assessment, you are ready to go to the next step. Step 4, consider the ethical, cultural, and political implications of your needs assessment. Sometimes this might be determining if an additional ethical oversight is required, such as filing an application with the Institutional Review Board. Sometimes this is more taking a moment in the needs assessment process to gain a deep understanding of the ethical, cultural, and political strengths and weaknesses of the needs assessment project. In step 4, make sure you're clearly defining what will or will not be done with the needs assessment. Often when assessing for needs, participants ask me, what is going to be done because we understand this need better? Make sure that you understand the answer to that question. Step 5, conduct the assessment. While you're conducting your assessment and beginning to collect data, make notes of the strengths and the weaknesses during this data collection phase. Were individuals able to fill out the survey themselves? Was there anybody there that could help read it to them? How many languages was the survey offered in? Make sure that you have a clear understanding of who your assessment was able to reach and who might have been left out. Step 6, analyze the data. Assess the data you've been able to collect and reflect on the underlying theory, the design strengths and weaknesses, those data collection strengths and weaknesses, and interpret your data. Reflect back to stakeholders, assessment participants, and the evaluation team as a whole to make sure those results make sense. Step 7, inform a recommended response. Use the data to craft a strong recommendation or response. One of the things that I encourage doing at this stage is to include multiple interpretations of the data and the findings. Multiple interpretations of the data is something that's new in social work, needs assessments, and evaluations, but is something that is more commonly used to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard and that even diverse ideas are coming to the table and not necessarily just being excluded as a part of the data analysis process. Step 8, engage in action and disseminate the findings from your needs assessment. Whenever possible, share the results and the resources that you developed for your needs assessment. This is one small way as social workers we can pay it forward. Now make sure that this is ethical. This is not always possible to do since sometimes the things that we find are very individual to the organizations that we're serving and aren't appropriate to share broadly, but when you can, do try to. Clarify the action informed by the needs assessment and why that was the chosen action. And lastly, start working on those recommended actions. Like many types of evaluation, needs assessments are influenced by external factors. Practical factors such as time, funding, theoretical factors such as the theories we use for practice and our positionalities, ethical factors such as social work or professional ethics, the legality of what we're doing, and the community or clients that we're serving, and topical factors such as politics, viewpoints of our stakeholders, the point in time in history we're conducting our needs assessment, and what knowledge and answers are most needed. So let's tie all of these things together into a real-world example, a project that I've done examining food insecurity among college and university students. This work started for me when I was a Student Success Fellow at the University of Michigan-Flint. They were very interested in figuring out factors that were influencing student persistence. Persistence is a term that describes how students are able to remain engaged or persist towards their degree. I conducted a mixed methods program evaluation for this project. Results from the quantitative data showed that there had been an increase in students who had no or very low estimated family contribution, or EFC, and were eligible for Pell Grants. It also showed a decline in the number of students receiving Pell Grants at the same time as there was an increase in students who needed them. Together, EFC and Pell eligibility often let us know the degree to which students are experiencing financial hardship. So I was able to show that as the percentage of students experiencing hardship increased, there was a growing number of students who went missing prior to graduating from U of M Flint. Missing is a term used to describe a student who isn't on academic probation or warning, so they have good enough grades to persist, but simply did not register for classes after completing the previous semester. Although there were measurable factors that seemed to contribute to students becoming missing, such as academic stress or a difficult class getting a C or lower in one 3-credit class, financial barriers were the greatest factor influencing persistence, as students with economic hardship were 1.49 times more likely to be missing or currently not persisting towards a degree when compared to students with a larger estimated family contribution or other financial resources. The qualitative data results are where I first began to understand that U of M Flint students were having other, more serious consequences caused by economic need. The quote on this side was provided by a faculty member who also was an administrator of a program that helped connect students to community resources like food, shelter, and transportation. They shared with me that there had been a growing number of students experiencing homelessness, and that community resources for students were often lacking or could cause even additional barriers to their persistence. At the end of the interview, after discussing challenges that students had been experiencing, they shared with me, "We have to realize that students won't have access to any of that, to laundry, food, bus fare, transportation. I see that time and time again. Students that don't have access to enough food, that are hungry." As a faculty member at the University of Michigan-Flint at the time, it seemed unacceptable to me that students could be hungry while trying to persist towards their degree. It also seemed to me like a basic need that we could provide for students. At the time, I was teaching a research methods course with the Bachelor of Social Work students, and I shared with them that I believed food insecurity was something that the school was experiencing, and asked if anyone wanted to use the course to learn how to conduct a needs assessment while also potentially being able to have an impact on programs offered at the university. 8 students took me up on this offer and worked with me to learn how to conduct a needs assessment. This means that the needs being assessed were absolute need, since I was focused on looking at food insecurity. The focus of this needs assessment was created after doing a fair bit of research on programs offered by other schools to help students who are experiencing financial hardship, and the students decided that they were going to use the assessment to see if they could start a student-led food pantry. The engagement level was an empowerment needs assessment, since the students who were learning how to do the assessment belonged to the community being evaluated and anonymously shared with me that they experienced food insecurity themselves or knew peers who did. They decided to conduct a quantitative needs assessment using the USDA definition and their existing assessment to develop and conduct a campus-wide survey of food insecurity. The quantitative survey was completed by 181 students. Of these students, 58.3 said they had skipped a meal due to the lack of food availability. 21.8 said that they had difficulty accessing a grocery store to buy food. This can sometimes indicate transportation needs. And 37.9% mentioned that they lacked access to other basic needs like toothpaste, toilet paper, and soap. The students were able to use the data from the needs assessment to write small grants, first starting the food pantry in a small closet in the Department of Social Work, and later being able to start an entire student-led food pantry that's now known as the Wolverine Food Den. The Wolverine Food Den provides shopping-style experiences for students who are experiencing food needs. Final considerations as we wrap up. I'm so proud of what those students were able to do with the data that they collected as a part of the needs assessment, but it should be noted that it was not easy. Until the data was provided, a lot of administrators did not realize the degree to which students were experiencing financial difficulties in their persistence towards their degree. That being said, a few final considerations. Be thinking about differences in positionality in our political power, in both how needs are defined, but also how they're assessed. We should be clarifying our role as an evaluator or our evaluation team in positionality to the needs that we're assessing and what our recommended actions are. Have a strong understanding about what the expectations might be of the individuals experiencing the problem that you're hoping to assess. Assessing needs often indicates that we are going to be doing something about it. To what degree is that action going to be taken? Make sure that you're being clear with your community. And lastly, as always, make sure that you're grounding your needs assessment process in the ethics and values of the social work profession. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's been a pleasure to share with you a little bit more about needs assessments. I hope that this helps you as you think about your needs assessments.